Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Finney recording a Math 7 lesson for Red Wing High School. Today's lesson is day 1 of concept number 5, dealing with adding and subtracting negative numbers. So the good news, guys, is that we've already started to work with this concept. Last week in class, I demonstrated and modeled for the visual learners a way that we could use algebra tiles and those positive and negative chips to borrow from the bank and subtract negative numbers. So now we're going to take that concept and we're going to make it a little more formal and use our math tools to do it on paper. So this lesson comes out of your student workbook. It is lesson 1-3 in your student workbook, which starts on page 19. So if you don't have your student workbook and a pencil out, you need to pause the video and get your materials ready to go so that you can take notes and fill in these practice problems along with me during the lesson video. Please pause the video and get your workbook open to page 19 and a pencil out at this time. So our goal today is to be able to add integers both positive and negative. And so we can see here a little bit of a pattern that occurs in this opening Explore It problem. If rain is increasing while the air evaporates and decreases the water, we can balance and look at how the water changes using positives for the starting and the growth of the value, and then negatives for all of the water that evaporates. And so when we look at doing that, if we start at 2 and there's no sun out and so nothing changes, I just have 2. My final height with no change and no evaporation is 2 inches. Then, now, let's imagine that 1 inch of water evaporates. That means that there would be 1 inch left. If 2 inches evaporate, there's no water left, and if 3 inches evaporate, we're now at a depth of -1, and then we'd go down and we'd keep going. If we lose 4 inches, we're down at a depth of -2. So the idea here is that because we started at a spot on the number line that was not 0, each time we subtract, we go down, and we can pass 0 and end up in negative land. This concept and this pattern is why when we add a negative, sometimes we end up in positive, like 2 plus -1, and sometimes we end up in negative land because the negative is bigger. My friend Mr. Kashi would explain it as sports teams. You have the positive team and the negative team. If there are more negatives than positives, the negative team wins. But if there are more positives than negatives, the positive team wins. So that might help you as well to relate it to a sports analogy. Which team wins? Who has more players? Are there more negatives or more positives? There are some extension questions to extend your learning in this pattern recognition. Specifically, will the sum of 2 and -6 be a positive or negative number? Pause the video and think about that. Once you've thought about what that answer might be looking for, we should also practice and recognize that the word sum means addition. So 2 plus -6. So the negative team has more players. Negative is going to win. So it's going to be a negative number. Sorry, kind of a sloppy box there. The other way to think about it is in terms of money. If I have $2 and I want to spend $6, I'm short $4. I would need to borrow and owe $4 to whoever loans me that money at the store. All right, let's turn to page 20 in our workbook. Pause the video to get squared away and onto that page if you need to. And when we look at adding 2 negatives, this is like increasing our debt. For those of you who are tech savvy and like taking pictures, maybe you're looking forward to taking a photography class in art, you might use this concept of negatives when you're looking at tilting or adjusting scale in photography. because when we tilt to go more negative, and then we go even further negative, that affects our negative value. If we think about it in terms of real life examples and think about it in terms of money, a negative plus a negative is going to be more negative. It would be like saying, I borrow some money from you, and then I borrow some more money. You want to be paid back the entire amount. You want to be paid back the entire amount of money. Okay? So you can see here that if I start, for those of you who are visual learners, I have to get my pen turned on real quick. For those of you who are visual learners, you can see here on a number line, if I go 4 into debt, or 4 to the left, and then I go another 6 units to the left, I land at a more negative number. And building off of prior knowledge, we can also think about how we would handle these using absolute value. So the absolute value of 4 and 6, are negative 4 and negative 6, are 4 plus 6, which is 10. And notice negative 10 is 10 units away from 0. So the sign tells me right or left of 0, and the absolute value tells me how far away or my final answer. So several different ways to think about what happens when we add negative numbers. Right now, I want you to pause and try the try it problem on the bottom of page 20. When you come back, I'll have some answers written in for you to check your work. Welcome back, everyone. Here you can see that I've worked through this problem. I've written down and translated the words. A drop represents negative, so I dropped 2 and then I dropped another 3. My sign at the end is going to be negative. And you can see here I also sketched it out on a quick number line so that you can see visually how we end up further to the left. One important note here is to remember that even though we're not talking about positive integers right now, we do want to make sure that we understand what happens when we have 2 positive numbers. If you give me money and then you give me more money, I have a bigger positive amount. So 2 positives being added together stays positive. I get the money and I get to keep the money. If I borrow money and then I borrow more money, that becomes more negative. If you need to pause the video and go back and revisit these examples, please do so. Otherwise, we're going to continue on and turn to page 21 for the last example of this lesson recording. So on the top of page 21, you can see the first example of what happens when we have some positive being added with some negative. Okay, and so here you can see in this reasoning box, there were more thumbs down votes, so the final rating is negative. This really comes down to that idea of using our positive and negative tiles. If we think about there being 5 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 4 positives, we can use our prior vocabulary and say that's a 0 pair, that's a 0 pair, that's a 0 pair, that's a 0 pair, and there's 1 negative value left over. Okay, so that's building off of our idea of using those algebra tiles or those plus and minus chips. And if we look at some example problems down here on the bottom, the first thing I want you to do is simply pause and think about what will my answer be? Will my answer be positive or negative? In letter A, I have negative 66, so I owe my mom $66, and I pay back 42 of them. I still owe her money. So that answer is going to be negative, and how much I owe her back is going to be the difference between 66 and 42, which when we subtract those two numbers is 24. So we end up with an answer of negative 24. So here over on the side, I flipped it around and I did my subtraction using the absolute value of those two numbers, just like they did in example 3 that you can read on your own. In letter B, I have negative 57 plus 57. Well, that's a 0 pair or an additive inverse. These two numbers are exact opposites, So my answer is going to be negative. And in letter C, I have $29. I'm going to spend $28. I will have a positive $1 left. So those are some examples of how to add negative and positive numbers. Remember, you want to focus on, are you ending up to the left of 0 or right of 0? And you want to ask yourself, what do I have more of? Do I have more debt or do I have more money? Hope this helps. We'll see you in the next lesson.